Hey guys, tonight we're climbing aboard something that looks glamorous from the outside and quietly tries to break you on the inside. The life of a 1950s stewardess. Forget the perfume ads and the poster smiles. Behind that lipstick and that little pillbox hat was a woman on her aching feet for 14 hours, hauling roast beef through turbulence at 4,000 feet, while a man named Gerald tried to order a martini and her phone number at the same time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And a real, heartfelt thank you to whoever suggested this one in the comments. You people quietly steer this whole channel with your ideas, and I never take that for granted. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, because somehow it is always the middle of the night for somebody. Oh, and if you ever want to drift off to these somewhere other than here, the channel is now up on Spotify as well. Link down in the description. No pressure at all. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft cabin hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's pause and wonder for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to smile for a living while your girdle slowly cut off your circulation? Could you pass a job interview that judged your weight, your height, your teeth, your age, and whether you happen to be wearing a wedding ring? Would you survive being weighed like airport luggage before every single shift? Could you carve a roast in mid-air over the Rocky Mountains without landing it in a stranger's lap? And what would you do the day the airline politely informed you that you had become too old at the ripe age of 32 to hand people peanuts? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1954. Your alarm is a hotel front desk. Your feet already hurt. And today you are one of the most glamorous underpaid women in America. So you want to fly. Adorable. Before you ever touch an airplane, you have to survive the application, which reads less like a job posting and more like a beauty pageant with a physical exam attached. You must be young, roughly 20 to 26, unmarried, a certain height, a certain weight, with good posture, straight teeth, clear skin, and absolutely no glasses on that pretty face. Experience in aviation. Not required. Experience in looking effortless while being judged head to toe by a stranger with a clipboard. Highly recommended. You walk in hopeful and walk out having been measured like a bolt of fabric. The interview itself is an exercise in polite dread. You sit up straight, ankles crossed, hands folded, wearing your very best while a panel studies you like a used car. They check your height against a chart, because too short and you cannot reach the overhead bins, too tall and you spoil the tidy uniform silhouette. There is a narrow window of acceptable, and you must fit inside it exactly. They look at your teeth. They look at your complexion. They look at your hands, because those hands will be pouring coffee where everyone can see them. Somewhere in your mind you may have imagined this job was about travel and adventure, and it is, technically. But first it is about whether you photograph well in a hat. They ask about your weight and note it down, because that number will follow you like a shadow for the rest of your very short career. They ask if you're married, and the correct answer is no. They may ask if you plan to marry soon, and the correct answer is also, somehow, no. You're applying to be single and stay single, and you learn this quickly. It's a bit like applying for a job where one of the qualifications is not falling in love, which is a strange thing to promise a stranger in a suit. Then there's the matter of your eyes. Perfect vision is often required, because glasses apparently ruin the fantasy. So if you happen to squint at the eye chart, you may be gently shown the door. A woman who could calmly evacuate a burning aircraft is turned away because she cannot read a menu without help. It's like being disqualified from lifeguarding for having freckles. The logic isn't the point. The image is the point. Everything here serves the image. If you clear the physical inspection, you face the harder test. The personality read. Are you warm? Are you graceful under pressure? Can you smile and mean it, or at least look like you mean it, for hours on end? They want a woman who is unshakably pleasant, endlessly patient, and quietly tough as boot leather underneath all that softness. They are, in truth, hiring someone extraordinary and pretending they're just hiring someone pretty. And here's the part that stings a little. Thousands of women apply for a handful of spots. The competition is fierce, the standards are absurd, and the rejection is common. So the ones who make it aren't lucky. They're survivors of a gauntlet designed to weed out nearly everyone. You've just proven you can be measured, weighed, inspected, questioned, and judged, and still walk out with your dignity and a job offer. Congratulations, you passed. You're now officially qualified to be exhausted at altitude. But before they let you anywhere near a real airplane, they're going to send you to school, and it is not the kind of school with a chemistry lab. It's the kind with a lipstick exam. Congratulations, you passed. Now you don't get an airplane, you get sent to school. But not the kind with algebra. This is stewardess training, a strange blend of hospitality boot camp and finishing school, where grown women are taught how to walk, how to sit, how to smile without looking tired, and how to apply lipstick in a moving vehicle. You practice pouring coffee. You practice saying kind things to rude people. Somewhere in there they teach you emergency procedures too, but honestly, the poise seems to get more classroom hours than the fire. The days are long and oddly structured, part military, part debutante ball. You learn to enter a cabin gracefully, to pivot without wobbling, to carry yourself as though a book is balanced on your head, because at some point a book probably was. Posture is drilled into you until standing up straight feels less like a choice and more like a permanent condition. You're being sculpted into a specific shape of woman, and the chisel is a very patient instructor with strong opinions about your shoulders. There are grooming classes, which sound gentle and are not. You're taught exactly how to do your hair, your makeup, your nails, all to a standard you'll be expected to meet every single working day for the rest of your career. You learn which shades are permitted and which are scandalous. You learn to reapply your face in a cramped, jostling space without smearing it across your cheek. It is genuine skill, painting a straight line of lipstick while the world shakes, and you will use it more than you'd think. Then comes the service training, the endless choreography of feeding and watering a full cabin. You learn to balance trays, to pour without spilling, to remember who wanted what, to move down a narrow aisle like water finding its path. You practice on rows of empty seats, serving imaginary passengers their imaginary dinners with very real precision. You rehearse the graceful handling of a coffee pot the way a soldier rehearses field stripping a rifle, because in a way, that pot is your weapon and your burden both. And you learn the art of the smile. This sounds ridiculous until you try smiling for 14 hours straight, at which point you understand it is a form of athletics. You're taught to be warm, welcoming, unflappable, to greet delight and disaster with the same serene expression. Someone spills a drink, smile. Someone is rude, smile. The plane hits a pocket of air and drops like a stone. Smile, because a calm face in the cabin keeps 100 nervous strangers from losing their nerve. Your composure is the passenger's seatbelt for their emotions. The safety training is real and it matters. Evacuations, first aid, what to do when things go genuinely wrong. But it often shares the schedule with lessons on how to make small talk and set a proper tray, which tells you exactly how the priorities are stacked. You're being trained to save lives and to look lovely doing it, and if forced to choose which one gets emphasized in the brochure, well, you already know the answer. By graduation, you are polished to a mirror shine. You can walk, serve, soothe, and smile through nearly anything. You've been transformed from an applicant into an institution with legs. It's like being sent to summer camp and coming home as a diplomat. And now, freshly minted and quietly terrified. You face your first real test of the job, one that has nothing to do with the sky and everything to do with a machine you'll come to dread, the scale. Let's talk about the scale, your new lifelong nemesis. In the 1950s, your weight is not a private matter between you and your bathroom floor. It is company business. There are strict limits tied to your height, and you can be weighed regularly, sometimes before a flight, in front of a supervisor holding a chart and a very disappointed expression. Gain a few pounds and you can be grounded, put on notice, or sent off to slim down. Imagine your boss standing over a scale to decide if you're allowed to serve dinner rolls. The whole arrangement is quietly humiliating in a way that becomes routine, which is somehow worse. You step onto the scale, the needle wavers, the supervisor reads it, and your fate for the day is decided by gravity. There is a chart, an actual chart, that pairs your height with the exact number of pounds you're permitted to be, and heaven help you if the number drifts north of the line. You're being managed like cargo, checked against a weight limit as though you might tip the aircraft. So your body becomes a workplace concern, monitored and remarked upon by people who have no business knowing what you weigh. A few pounds up, and the comments begin, gentle at first, then less so. You may be given a warning, a deadline, a not-so-subtle suggestion to get yourself back within range. In extreme cases, you can be pulled from flying entirely until the scale forgives you. Your paycheck, your schedule, your whole standing at the company can hinge on a number that most people would rather die than share. This creates a very particular kind of pressure that follows you off the clock and into every meal. You start eyeing dinner with suspicion. You calculate. You skip things. You develop a fraught relationship with food that the airline neither notices nor cares about, because the airline only sees the silhouette in the poster. It's a bit like being told your job depends on your reflection, and then being handed a funhouse mirror and a stopwatch. And the cruelty of it is the timing, because this is a physically punishing job. You're on your feet for endless hours, hauling heavy trays, bending and lifting and lunging through a narrow aisle. You burn through energy like a furnace, yet you're expected to stay reed thin while doing the caloric equivalent of moving furniture all day. Your body wants fuel to survive the shift, and the chart wants you delicate. Those two things are at war, and you are the battlefield. There's a grim absurdity to the priorities on display. A woman could be brilliant at the actual job, calm in turbulence, quick in an emergency, adored by every passenger she serves, and still find herself grounded because the needle nudged past an arbitrary line. Her competence weighs nothing on that scale. Only her body counts, and only in the most literal sense. You can save the day and still lose the job for the crime of being 3 pounds too human. So you learn to fear the scale the way you fear a bad landing, that little lurch of dread before the number appears. You watch what you eat, you watch what you weigh, and you smile through all of it, because complaining is not part of the image, and the image is everything. The scale becomes a quiet, constant judge in the corner of your career, and just when you think you understand the war on your body, you discover the airline has a second front, hidden beneath your beautiful uniform, cinched tight and utterly non-negotiable. Under that crisp, elegant uniform is a piece of engineering you did not consent to, the girdle. And no, wearing one is not a suggestion. It is expected, sometimes checked, because heaven forbid the silhouette of a working woman have a single natural curve out of place. So you spend 14 hours compressed like a sausage in a very respectable casing, bending, lifting, and lunging down narrow aisles while your midsection quietly begs for mercy. It's like doing a full shift of manual labour while wearing a medieval corset designed by someone who hated you personally. The girdle is not a gentle garment. It is firm, unforgiving, and built to smooth every line of you into the tidy uniform shape the airline prefers. It holds you in, holds you up, and hold you hostage. Once it's on, you are committed. There is no discreet loosening halfway through the flight, no quiet moment of relief in the galley. You are cinched for the duration, and the duration on these slow propeller flights can stretch on for a very long and very compressed time. Now add the actual work to that constriction, because your job is not a job of sitting prettily. You're constantly bending to reach low seats, lifting heavy trays, twisting through the aisle, crouching, stretching, hauling. Every one of those motions fights against the girdle, which was designed for standing still and looking sculpted, not for the athletic reality of feeding 100 people at altitude. It's like trying to run a marathon in a garment sewn shut. Your body wants to move freely, and the airline wants you to move freely while appearing to be made of poured concrete. The physical toll is real and quietly brutal. Hours of compression around your middle in a warm cabin, doing hard labour, is not a recipe for comfort. You feel it in your ribs, your breathing, the general sense that some part of you is always being politely strangled. And yet the face must stay serene. That is the trick of this entire profession. The constant gap between what your body's enduring and what your expression is allowed to reveal. You could be genuinely miserable from the waist down and still be beaming from the neck up. And yes, there are inspections. The airline does not simply trust you to comply, because trusting women to make their own choices about their own bodies is apparently a bridge too far. Your undergarments can be checked, a supervisor confirming that the required foundation is firmly in place before you're cleared to work. Picture a grown professional being verified for proper girdling like a schoolgirl checked for the right uniform socks. It's degrading in a way that everyone has simply agreed to treat as normal, which is its own kind of strange. The whole thing reveals the deeper truth of the job, which is that your body is not entirely your own while you're on the payroll. It has been weighed, measured, inspected, cinched and put on display, all in service of a silhouette printed on a poster somewhere. You are the fantasy of effortless feminine grace, and the fantasy requires a great deal of very unglamorous hardware to hold it together. Nobody buying a ticket ever imagines the elastic engineering underneath. So you lunge and lift and smile inside your beautiful, breath-stealing casing, counting the hours until you can peel it off and feel like a person again. It is uncomfortable, controlling, and faintly ridiculous. And it is only one layer of the outfit because the uniform on top of it comes with a rulebook all its own, and that rulebook has just as many opinions and just as little mercy. Now, for the outfit, which is genuinely beautiful and genuinely a trap. Tailored jacket, pressed skirt, crisp blouse, spotless white gloves, a little hat pinned at exactly the right angle, and heels. Always the heels. Every element has a regulation, and every regulation has someone waiting to enforce it. You cannot loosen the jacket when you're hot. You cannot swap the heels for something merciful when your arches surrender. You're a walking advertisement, and advertisements are not allowed to look uncomfortable, even when they're dying inside. The uniform is, admittedly, a lovely thing to behold. It's smart, it's elegant, it turns you into the very picture of modern travel. But it was designed to be admired, not endured, and there is a vast difference between the two. Every seam and button serves the look, and the look demands that you wear all of it, correctly, for the entire shift, no matter the temperature of the cabin or the state of your feet. The outfit is the star of the show, and you are its very tired supporting cast. Take the jacket, it stays on. The cabin can grow warm, packed with bodies and stuffy air and the heat of your own labour, and still the jacket remains, buttoned and proper, because a stewardess in shirt sleeves would shatter the illusion. You sweat quietly inside it and keep smiling, because visible discomfort is against the unwritten rules. It's like being asked to look cool and collected while wrapped in a warm blanket and told to jog. Then there are the gloves, white and pristine, which you're expected to keep clean while handling food, drinks, trays, and the general grime of a working cabin. White gloves in a job full of coffee and gravy is a small act of institutional comedy, a standard that seems almost designed to be impossible. You guard them like treasure, because a smudge is a flaw and a flaw is a problem. The airline wants you spotless in a setting engineered to produce spills, and the hat, perched at its precise mandated angle, pinned so it survives turbulence and rushing and the general chaos of the day. It is not there for warmth or function. It is there to complete the silhouette, the finishing flourish on the fantasy. You adjust it, you repin it, you make sure it sits just so, because a crooked hat is the kind of thing a supervisor notices. It's a crown that gives you no power and demands constant maintenance. Worst of all, for your poor body, are the heels, non-negotiable, always, through every hour of standing and walking and lifting. Your job is essentially a full day of physical labour performed on the balls of your feet, in shoes built for looking, not lasting. You cannot switch to something kinder when your arches begin to scream. You simply endure, gracefully, because the fantasy has no room for flat, sensible, merciful footwear. It's like being asked to work a warehouse shift in ballroom shoes and to please stop wincing. The genius and the cruelty of the uniform is that it makes suffering look like glamour. The public sees the polish, never the pinch. They see a poised, gorgeous woman gliding through the cabin, not the compressed midsection, the sweltering jacket, the aching feet, the crown that must be forever adjusted. You carry the whole illusion on your body, seam by seam, and you make it look effortless. And once you're buttoned, pinned, gloved, and balanced on those heels, there is still one more inspection to pass before anyone lets you near a passenger, and this one is about your actual face. Before you're allowed anywhere near a passenger, there is the face inspection. Your hair must be a specific length, off the collar, neatly styled and staying put through wind, turbulence, and despair. Your makeup must be present but tasteful. Your nails a permitted shade. Your whole appearance polished to a shine. Show up with hair a touch too long or lipstick in the wrong red, and you may be sent to fix it. It's like getting dress-coded for high school every single morning, except the principal can end your career. The rules about your hair are astonishingly specific. It cannot touch your collar. It must be arranged in an approved style, tidy and controlled, and it must stay that way through a full day of rushing about in a moving aircraft. This means pins, spray, and a small daily battle to lock everything into place before the world has a chance to muss it. Your hairstyle is not an expression of you. It is a regulation you happen to be wearing on your head, enforced down to the inch. Your makeup lives in the same narrow band of the acceptable. You must wear it, because a bare face won't do, but it must be understated, ladylike, never bold enough to raise an eyebrow. There's a correct amount, a correct look, a correct shade of lip, and you're expected to hit that target every single day without fail. Too little, and you look unfinished. Too much, and you look improper. You walk a painted tightrope, and someone is always watching to see if you wobble. Even your fingernails fall under review, because those hands are on constant display as you pour and serve and gesture through the cabin. The polish must be a permitted colour, neat and unchipped. Another small detail on the endless checklist of your appearance. It's a lot of scrutiny for 10 fingers, but nothing about you is too minor to be regulated. If it can be seen by a passenger, it can be judged by the airline, and this is a daily ordeal, not a one-time transformation. Every working morning you must reassemble yourself into this flawless, approved version of a woman, from the crown of your controlled hair to the tips of your permitted nails. There is no showing up rumpled, no rolling out of a strange hotel bed and simply going to work. You build the fantasy fresh each day, with pins and powder and patience, before the sun has even fully agreed to rise. If any piece is off, you can be caught. A supervisor's eye catches hair that grazes the collar, or lipstick a shade too daring, and you're sent to correct it before you're cleared. It's a strange feeling, being a competent adult professional dispatched to fix your face like a teenager caught bending the dress code. The standard doesn't bend for your skill or your seniority. It simply demands compliance, over and over, morning after morning. The deeper point, as always, is the image. You're not merely an employee. You are the airline-made flesh, the walking, smiling embodiment of everything the posters promise. Every regulated hair and approved shade of red serves that promise. The public must see perfection, and perfection, it turns out, is a great deal of unseen daily labour performed in front of a mirror in a hurry. You are your own full-time art project, and the museum has very strict standards. So you paint, you pin, you polish, and you pass inspection, ready at last to be seen. And having survived every rule about your body and your face, you're about to run headlong into a rule about your heart, one so blunt and so unfair that it can end everything with a single glint of gold. Here's a rule that will make your modern jaw drop. In the 1950s, if you get married, you're usually fired. That's it. That's the policy. A wedding ring is essentially a resignation letter you didn't mean to write. So women hide engagements, postpone weddings, and quietly panic every time a supervisor glances at their left hand. The airline wants you glamorous, available, and single, forever selling a fantasy. Fall in love on your own time, and by fall in love they mean absolutely not, at least not out loud. The logic behind it, if you can call it logic, is all about the image. The stewardess is being sold as the ideal young woman, unattached and endlessly charming, and a wedding band spoils the story the airline is telling. A married woman, in their view, belongs to someone else and to a home, not to the cabin and the travelling public. So the rule is simple and merciless. Stay single or step aside. You may serve the skies, or you may be a wife, but you may not be both. This puts women in an impossible bind, forced to choose between the career they fought so hard to earn and the ordinary human wish to build a life with someone. Fall in love, and you're falling toward the end of your job. So many keep their romances secret, tucked away like contraband. Engagements happen in whispers. Rings are worn on chains beneath the blouse or left at home entirely. You could be planning a whole future in private while smiling through your shift, as though your heart belonged to no one but the airline. And the surveillance is real, because the airline has an interest in catching you. A supervisor's glance at your left hand isn't idle, it's a check. That little band of gold is evidence, and evidence gets you grounded. So you learn to keep your hands casual, your personal life invisible, your happiness quiet. It's a peculiar thing, hiding good news, because good news could cost you everything. Most people announce an engagement with joy. You'd announce it with a resignation letter attached. The unfairness of it lands harder the longer you sit with it. A man in nearly any profession could marry freely, build a family, and keep right on working, his wedding day a cause for congratulations rather than dismissal. But you, doing a demanding, skilled job, are told that love disqualifies you. Your competence means nothing against the fact of a husband. It's as though the airline hired your youth and your availability rather than your ability, and a marriage returns those things to their rightful owner, which is to say, not the airline. So women live double lives, and they get very good at it. They protect their relationships like state secrets. They time their weddings around their careers. They weigh every choice against the ticking possibility of discovery. Some leave the job to marry. Some keep the job and delay the marriage. Some try to have both in secret and hold their breath the whole time. It's an exhausting way to love someone, always looking over your shoulder, always aware that a happy life outside work could erase your work entirely. The whole arrangement lays bare what the job really is beneath the glamour. You're not merely an employee with a role to fill. You're a fantasy the airline is renting, and the terms of that rental include your marital status. Your single life is, quite literally, a job requirement. And if you somehow dodge the marriage rule and stay carefully, dutifully unattached, don't relax just yet, because there is another clock ticking against you, and this one you cannot outsmart with a chain around your neck. It's the calendar, and it comes for everyone, and if the marriage rule doesn't get you, time will. Many airlines quietly retire stewardesses in their early 30s, as though a woman becomes structurally unsound the moment she turns 32. You could be excellent at your job, calm in a crisis, beloved by passengers, and still be shown the door for the unforgivable crime of aging normally. It's a career with a built-in ticking clock, and everyone can hear it, but you're supposed to keep smiling over the sound. The message underneath is blunt and a little breathtaking. The airline is not truly hiring your skill, which only grows with the years. It is hiring your youth, which fades on a schedule the company finds inconvenient. So an age limit hangs over the whole profession like a low ceiling. You have a handful of good years, and then, regardless of how well you do the actual work, you age out of the fantasy. Your birthday becomes a countdown rather than a celebration. Think about how backward that is compared to nearly any other line of work. In most jobs, experience is treasure. The longer you do it, the better you get, the more valuable you become. A seasoned professional is worth more than a green one, because she knows the ropes, keeps her head, handles the surprises. By that measure, an experienced stewardess should be the crown jewel of the cabin. Instead, she's the one quietly pushed toward the exit, precisely when she's finally mastered the craft. Because make no mistake, this is a job that rewards experience even as it punishes age. The veteran knows how to read the weather in the passengers' faces, how to calm the nervous flyer, how to handle the drunk, how to keep the whole cabin steady when the plane starts to buck. She's a professional at the peak of her ability, and the airline looks at that competence, then looks at the calendar, and chooses the calendar. It's like firing your best worker for the sin of having gotten good. There's a quiet dread in it too, a sense of time running out that colours the whole career. You're not just doing a job, you're racing a clock you cannot beat. Every year is one closer to the day someone decides you no longer fit the poster. You watch older colleagues get eased out and you know you're looking at your own near future. It's hard to feel secure in a role that treats your continued existence as a liability. The floor is always slowly tilting toward the door, and the standard is so arbitrary, so untethered from anything that actually matters, that it borders on absurd. 32 is not old. A woman in her early 30s is capable, sharp, and often at her most confident and composed. But the fantasy has no room for her, so out she goes, replaced by someone younger who will, in turn, be replaced when her own number comes up. The whole thing is a conveyor belt of youth, and everyone on it is just riding toward the same inevitable drop-off. So you smile over the sound of the ticking, because complaining about it is, of course, not part of the image. You enjoy your bright, brief window, and try not to think too hard about its edges. It's a strange way to hold a job, knowing it holds an expiration date stamped somewhere you can't see, but can always feel. And with your body inspected, your heart forbidden, and your future on a timer, it's finally, mercifully, time to start an actual working day, which begins not with a bang, but with a ringing telephone in a room you don't recognise. Now, let's actually start your day, which begins in a hotel room somewhere far from home, jolted awake by a ringing telephone and a stranger's cheerful voice announcing your wake-up call. There's no snooze button on a front desk. You blink at an unfamiliar ceiling, remember which city you're in, and begin the sacred morning ritual of assembling yourself into a flawless human being before the sun has fully committed to rising. Your feet already remember yesterday. They're not looking forward to today. The disorientation is its own small daily adventure. For a few foggy seconds, you genuinely do not know where you are, because yesterday it was one city and tomorrow it will be another, and they all blur into the same beige room with the same heavy curtains and the same stranger on the phone. You piece it together slowly. The route, the schedule, the name of the town outside the window. Home is a distant concept. Your real address for now is wherever the airline last set you down. And that phone call is your master. There is no gently drifting awake, no lazy reach for a snooze button, no negotiating with your alarm for 5 more minutes. A voice from the front desk announces the hour, and the hour is non-negotiable, because a crew that misses its report time is a flight that doesn't leave. So you rise the instant you're summoned, no matter how little sleep you managed, no matter how late the last flight ran, or how early this one begins. Your rest is at the mercy of the timetable, and the timetable does not care that you're tired. Then begins the ritual, the full daily reconstruction of the flawless woman from the previous chapters. The controlled hair, the tasteful makeup, the pressed uniform, the pinned hat, the polished nails. All of it, from scratch, in a hurry, in a hotel bathroom that isn't yours. You build the fantasy fresh every single morning, because you never sleep at home and you never wake up ready. Perfection has to be assembled daily, and there's rarely quite enough time to assemble it in peace. Your feet, meanwhile, are already lodging complaints from the moment they hit the floor. They have not forgotten yesterday's 14 hours in those heels, the endless aisle, the standing and lifting and lunging. Rest was supposed to fix them, but rest was short and the damage runs deep, so they ache from the very first step of a day that will only ask more of them. It's like waking up sore from a workout and being told your reward is another longer workout. Your body knows what's coming. Your body is not thrilled. There's a loneliness to it too, tucked into the routine. You wake in an empty room in a city where you know no one, far from anyone who loves you, and you get yourself ready to go smile at 100 strangers. The glamour the public imagines, the jet-setting woman waking in exotic places, looks rather different from the inside. It's more often a tired woman in an anonymous room, doing her hair by an unfamiliar mirror, steeling herself for the day with no one there to see the effort it takes. Yet you do it, morning after morning, because that's the job, and there's a quiet toughness in that alone. You answer the phone, you rise on command, you rebuild yourself into the poised professional the day requires, aching feet and all. The fantasy never sees this part, the bleary-eyed assembly in the pre-dawn dark. It only sees the finished woman who steps out the door. And once she's assembled and out that door, the day's first stop isn't the airplane at all. It's a room full of colleagues and a rundown of everything that might go wrong before you've even left the ground. Before the passengers, before the coffee, before the chaos, comes the briefing. You gather with the crew to go over the route, the weather, the passenger count, and any special situations, which usually means someone important or someone difficult is aboard. You confirm the meal service, the emergency equipment, and who's responsible for what. It's the calm, professional huddle before hours of controlled cheerfulness. You nod, you note it all, and you brace yourself because the sky, like the passengers, makes no promises. This is the moment the job reveals its serious face, the one the posters never show. Here, in this quiet gathering, you're not a smiling ornament. You're a working member of a crew with responsibilities that matter. You listen closely as the details are laid out, because a briefing is not a formality. It's the map for the hours ahead, and a stewardess who drifts off during it is a stewardess caught flat-footed when something goes sideways. So you pay attention, sharp and focused, before the performance begins. The route and the weather come first, and the weather is the part that makes you brace. These are low, slow aircraft that fly through the sky's moods rather than serenely above them. So a forecast of rough air is a forecast of a long, bumpy day of serving hot food on an unstable floor. You learn what's coming, which stretches will shake and which will settle, and you begin quietly planning how to feed 100 people through it. Knowing the storm is ahead doesn't stop the storm, but at least you won't be surprised by it. Then the passenger count and the special cases, because every flight has its own little cast of complications. Perhaps someone notable is aboard and warrants extra care. Perhaps someone is known to be difficult, or nervous, or the sort who treats the crew as personal servants. Perhaps there's a passenger needing particular attention for their health or comfort. You take note of it all, filing away who might need soothing and who might need managing, because forewarned is, if not forearmed, at least slightly less ambushed. You go over the meal service, the choreography of feeding the cabin, who plates what and when and in what order, so that the whole intricate dance runs smoothly once you're airborne. And crucially, you review the emergency equipment and the safety procedures, the genuinely life and death portion of the job that lives quietly beneath all the charm. Where everything is, how it works, who does what if the worst happens. This is the part that reminds you that behind the pillbox hat and the poured coffee, you're trained for real trouble. Responsibilities get divided, each crew member clear on their role, so there's no fumbling confusion once the doors close. It's a small, orderly moment of teamwork, everyone aligned before the pleasant mayhem of service begins. There's something steadying in it, this brief huddle of competent people getting their story straight. For a few minutes you're not performing for anyone. You're just a professional among professionals sorting out the plan. Then the doors open and the performance resumes. Because that's the strange duality of this whole job, laid bare in the briefing. You're equal parts serious safety professional and smiling hostess, and you switch between the two in the space of a breath. One moment you're reviewing evacuation procedures with a level head. The next you're beaming a welcome at boarding passengers, as though your only concern in the world is their comfort. The briefing is where the serious half gets its due. Quietly, out of sight. You nod, you note it all, and you brace yourself. And now, prepared and composed, you step aboard to meet the roaring, rattling machine you'll call your workplace for the next 14 hours. Time to meet your workplace, and it is a magnificent, deafening, propeller-driven beast. This is the age before quiet jets, so you'll be spending your day inside a long metal tube powered by engines that roar like a permanent argument. These planes fly lower and slower, which means longer flights and a far more intimate relationship with every bump of weather along the way. You will learn the personality of turbulence the way a sailor learns the sea. Spoiler: the sea is in a mood, and so is the sky. Step aboard and the first thing that greets you is the sound, or rather the promise of it, because once those engines fire up, the roar settles over the whole cabin and simply never leaves. Propeller aircraft are loud in a way that jets never quite are. A constant droning thunder that you feel in your chest as much as hear in your ears. You raise your voice to be heard, you lean in close. By the end of the day, the noise is soaked so deep into your skull that silence, when you finally find it, feels almost strange. Then there's the pace, which is nothing like the swift, smooth crossings the future will bring. These planes are slow, and they cruise at lower altitudes, so a journey that a modern jet would swallow in a couple of hours stretches on and on. Longer in the air means longer on your feet, longer serving, longer soothing, longer smiling. The distance hasn't changed, but the clock certainly has. You're not doing a quick hop. You're settling in for a marathon at 4,000 feet, and flying low and slow has a consequence that your body comes to dread, because it means flying through the weather rather than serenely over it. A modern jet climbs high above most of the sky's tantrums, and glides along in calm. Your aircraft does no such thing. It ploughs straight through the clouds and the currents and the churning air, feeling every gust and pocket and pressure change along the way. The sky is not a smooth highway up here. It's a rutted country road, and you're riding it in a rattling machine. So you come to know turbulence the way a sailor knows the ocean, intimately and with healthy respect. You learn which kinds of bumps are nothing, and which kinds send the coffee flying. You develop a sense for the sky's moods, reading the ride the way an old hand reads the swell. It becomes part of your working knowledge, this feel for when to grip the seat back and when to keep pouring. Nobody teaches you the finer points in a classroom. The sky teaches you, one lurch at a time. The cabin itself is your entire domain for these long hours, a narrow world with a low ceiling and a floor that refuses to stay level. You'll walk its length countless times, learn every seat and every quirk, come to know it better than most rooms in your own life. It is beautiful in its way, this humming metal capsule carrying strangers across the country. It is also cramped, loud, and in constant gentle motion, which is a lot to ask of a person expected to serve gravy in it. But there's a genuine romance to these machines too, for all their roar and rattle. They are the marvels of their moment, carrying people through the air in a way that still feels a little like magic to most of the passengers aboard. And you are part of that magic, the calm, smiling figure moving through the thunder as though it were nothing. First, though, before you can serve a single soul, you have to stand up in front of them all and perform the one part of the show that's secretly deadly serious. Now you stand at the front of the cabin and perform, because part of this job is theatre. You demonstrate the seatbelt, point out the exits, and explain what to do if things go dramatically wrong, all while smiling as though you're describing a picnic. Half the passengers watch politely. The other half are already lighting cigarettes and ignoring you entirely. You keep going. You're calm, poised, reassuring. Behind the smile, you're very aware of exactly where every exit is, because you had to memorize them for real. It is a strange little performance, this ritual at the start of every flight. You hold up the seatbelt and show how it fastens, as though grown adults have never encountered a buckle. You gesture gracefully toward the exit, sweeping your hand through the air like a game show hostess revealing a prize. You explain, in a pleasant and measured voice, precisely what to do should the aircraft find itself in serious trouble. And you do all of it with a warm smile because panic is contagious and calm is your job. The tone you strike is the whole trick of it. You're describing genuinely frightening possibilities, the kind of things nobody boarding wants to contemplate, and you are describing them as though you were reading a lovely weather report. The words are serious. The delivery is sunshine. This gap is deliberate because a nervous cabin is a difficult cabin, and the last thing anyone needs before takeoff is a reminder, delivered grimly, of everything that could go wrong. So you wrap the hard truths in a soft voice and hand them over gently. Your audience, of course, is only half listening at best. Some passengers watch with polite attention, following your hands, nodding along. But plenty are already lost in their newspapers, or chatting with a seatmate, or lighting up a cigarette without a glance in your direction. You're pouring out potentially life-saving information to a room that has largely decided it doesn't need it. It's a bit like giving a heartfelt speech to a crowd checking its watches. You give it anyway, fully, because the one time it matters, it will matter enormously. And here is the part that stays with you, underneath the theatrical smile. You're not merely reciting a script. You know exactly where every exit is, because you had to learn it for real, in training, as a matter of genuine survival. You have rehearsed the emergency you hope never comes. Those exits you're gesturing at so prettily are in your mind, marked and mapped and deadly serious. The passengers see a graceful demonstration. You see the plan you would actually execute if the worst arrived. That's the quiet weight this moment carries. The real steel beneath the pleasant surface. Everything about your presentation says relax, everything's fine, enjoy your flight. But your training says be ready, know your equipment, keep your head. You hold both of those things at once, the reassurance and the readiness, the smile and the seriousness. It's a lot to carry while pointing at a life vest, and yet you carry it without a flicker of strain showing on your face. So you finish the demonstration, tuck away the props, and return to your friendlier duties, having quietly reminded yourself of the graver ones. The passengers settle in, most of them already forgetting you spoke at all. You don't mind. Their comfort is the whole point of your calm. And with the safety ritual behind you and the aircraft climbing into that low, bumpy sky, your attention turns to the cramped little corner where the real physical labour of the day is about to begin, a space so tight and so demanding it deserves a warning label of its own. Welcome to the galley, a closet-sized kitchen that would give a modern chef a nervous breakdown. In these early years there are no tidy rolling carts to save your back, so you carry heavy trays by hand, up and down a narrow aisle, in a moving aircraft, over and over. The space is cramped, hot, and stuffed with everything you need to feed a full cabin. You are part cook, part waitress, part acrobat, balancing hot food and hot coffee, while the floor itself refuses to hold still. The galley is small in a way that has to be experienced to be believed, a tight little nook crammed with everything required to serve a plane full of hungry passengers. There is barely room to turn around, let alone work efficiently. Yet work efficiently you must, because a whole cabin is waiting to be fed. Every inch is packed with supplies, dishes, food and drink, all stowed with the tight logic of a space that has none to spare. You learn to move within it like a dancer in a phone booth, and it is hot, because this cramped corner is where the food is kept warm and the coffee stays scalding, and all that heat has nowhere to go. You work in that warmth, in your buttoned jacket and your firm girdle, sweating quietly while you plate and pour. The cabin beyond might be stuffy, but the galley is an oven, and you're the one stationed inside it. It's the least glamorous square footage on the entire aircraft, and you spend a great deal of your day in it. The truly punishing part, though, is what's missing, because in these early years there are no neat rolling carts to do the heavy lifting for you. You carry everything by hand. The loaded trays, the heavy pots, the full plates, all of it, hauled from the galley down the aisle and back again and again, flight after flight. Your arms and back bear the whole burden with no wheeled help at all. It's the difference between pushing a grocery cart and carrying every bag across a parking lot one at a time over and over for 14 hours. Now put that labour on a moving floor, because the aircraft is never truly still. The plane climbs, banks, and shudders through the low weather, and you're expected to carry hot food and hotter coffee through all of it without spilling a drop on a passenger's lap. You brace, you balance, you time your steps to the rhythm of the ride. A sudden lurch at the wrong moment, and disaster looms. So you become an acrobat by necessity, reading the motion, adjusting mid-stride, keeping the tray level while the world tilts beneath you. You are, in truth, wearing several jobs at once inside that little space. You're a cook, warming and assembling the meals. You're a waitress, delivering them with a smile and remembering who wanted what. And you're a physical labourer and a balance artist rolled together, hauling weight through motion, while looking utterly serene about it. No single one of those roles is easy. Doing all of them at once in a hot closet on an unsteady floor is the quiet athletic feat at the heart of this pretty profession. By the end of a shift, the galley has taken its toll in your arms, your back, your feet, and your general sense that you have been through something. The passengers never see this corner or understand what it costs. They only see the finished plate arriving gracefully at their seat. That's exactly how you're meant to make it look. effortless. And once the food is warmed and the trays are loaded and you've steadied yourself against the next bump, it's time to carry all of it out into the cabin, because in this era, dinner in the sky is a genuine event. Now the meal service begins, and this is no bag of pretzels. In the 1950s, air travel is fancy, so you may be plating proper dinners, sometimes even carving a roast right there in the cabin like a butler at 40-some hundred feet. You balance real china, real cutlery, and real gravy over the laps of strangers while the plane gently bounces to remind you who's in charge. One patch of rough air at the wrong moment and someone's lovely suit is wearing tonight's entree. No pressure. Air travel in this era is a special occasion, a luxury, and the meal service reflects that with a seriousness that borders on the theatrical. This is not the future, with its shrink-wrapped snacks and plastic forks. This is a proper dining experience delivered at altitude, complete with real plates, real metal cutlery, and hot food served with care. Passengers dress up to fly, and they expect to be fed as though they're seated in a fine restaurant rather than strapped into a rattling metal tube. Your job is to make that fantasy real. So you plate proper dinners, arrange with attention, and in the grandest moments you may find yourself carving a roast right there in the aisle. Picture it. You, in your pristine uniform and white gloves, slicing meat with a butler's grace while the aircraft hums and sways around you. It's an astonishing thing to attempt in a moving vehicle, an act of pure showmanship and steady nerves. The passengers are meant to feel pampered, and they do, blissfully unaware of the calculation happening behind your calm. Because all this elegance rests on real, breakable, spillable things, and that raises the stakes enormously. Real china can shatter, real gravy can slide, real cutlery can clatter to the floor. You carry these hazards over the laps of well-dressed strangers, and you do it while the floor beneath you refuses to hold perfectly still. Every dish you set down is a small negotiation with gravity and motion. It's like waiting tables at a black-tie dinner where the dining room occasionally drops 3 feet without warning. That gentle bounce of the aircraft is your constant, unwelcome dining companion. These low, slow planes ride the weather, and the weather has opinions, so the cabin sways and shudders as you work. You learn to time your movements to the rhythm of the ride, setting down the gravy in the calm and bracing through the bumps. A single patch of rough air at the wrong instant, and tonight's beautifully plated entree ends up decorating a passenger's fine suit. You have seen it happen. You spend the whole service quietly determined that it won't happen to you. And through all of it, you smile, because the elegance is the product and the labour is meant to stay invisible. The passenger is supposed to see a graceful woman gliding through the cabin with a beautiful meal, not the intense concentration required to keep that meal off his trousers. You make the difficult look easy, the risky look routine, the athletic look effortless. It's the same trick as always. The vast gap between what you're actually doing and what you're allowing anyone to see. By the time the last plate is served, you've performed a small miracle of balance, timing, and poise, feeding a full cabin of fine diners in a swaying machine without a single catastrophe. Or, on a rough day, with one you smoothed over so smoothly that half the cabin never noticed. Either way, you make it look like nothing at all, and just when your arms are grateful the heavy plates are cleared, it's time to bring out the drinks, which in this era means something considerably stronger than tea and considerably more likely to cause you trouble. Then comes the drink service, which in this era leans heavily toward cocktails. You mix and pour and refill, keeping the whole cabin lubricated and cheerful, which sounds pleasant until you remember that alcohol at altitude turns some passengers into their absolute worst selves. A few drinks in, the polite businessman becomes a comedian, a flirt, or a philosopher, and you are the captive audience for all three. You smile, you refill, you gently ration, and you pray the flight is shorter than his tolerance. Drinks are a genuine centerpiece of the experience in these years, and the drinks in question are not shy. Cocktails flow freely, part of the whole glamorous ritual of air travel, and you are the one mixing and pouring them throughout the flight. It's presented as a pleasure, a touch of sophistication in the sky, and for the passengers it largely is. For you, it's another round of labour, moving through the cabin, keeping glasses full and spirits high, quite literally. You are, among your many roles, the bartender at 4,000 feet. The trouble is that alcohol behaves strangely up here, and so do the people drinking it. Something about altitude and confinement and a long, bumpy flight loosens people in ways that aren't always charming. A few drinks in, the reserved gentleman from boarding becomes an entirely different creature. Suddenly he's telling jokes, and he needs you to laugh at everyone. Or he's grown philosophical, and he needs you to hear his thoughts on life, marriage, and the state of the nation, at length, whether you like it or not. Worse still is the one the drinks make bold. The businessman who decides that your captive presence and forced smile are an invitation. A few cocktails and he's flirting, leaning in, growing familiar in ways no sober stranger would dare. And you can't simply walk away because you're trapped in this metal tube with him for hours, and because the whole ethos of the job insists the customer be indulged. So you become the reluctant audience for whatever the alcohol is unlocked, nodding, smiling, deflecting, and quietly counting the miles to landing. Managing all this requires a subtle skill nobody puts in the job description, the art of the gentle ration. You cannot cut a paying passenger off with a scowl, but you can slow the pace, water things down, take your time on the refills, steer the cheerful ones away from becoming the difficult ones. It's a delicate diplomacy, keeping the cabin merry without letting it tip into mayhem. You are pouring the very thing that creates your problem, and then quietly, tactfully, trying to keep that problem from getting out of hand. And you do it all with that unshakable smile, because visible irritation is not permitted no matter how tiresome the comedian in seat 6 becomes. Inside you may be gritting your teeth at the fourth telling of the same joke, or bracing against the flirt's latest overreach, but your face reveals none of it. You are pleasant, you are patient, you are endlessly gracious. The gap between what you feel and what you show has never been wider than during our 3 of an overserved passenger's monologue. So you refill, you ration, you smile, and you pray, genuinely pray, that this particular flight lands before this particular passenger fully outdrinks his own good manners. Some days you win that race, some days you don't, and the trip becomes a long exercise in graceful endurance. Either way, the cocktails are only one hazard drifting through the cabin. There's another that hangs in the very air you breathe, thick and blue and inescapable, and unlike the drinks you can't ration it, water it down or ever quite get away from it. Now breathe in deep, or actually maybe don't. Almost everyone smokes, and they smoke everywhere, freely, constantly, right there in the sealed cabin you're trapped in for hours. The air turns hazy and blue, your uniform soaks up the smell, and your lungs quietly file a formal complaint. There's no escaping it, no fresh air section, no polite way to ask an entire generation to please stop. You just work through the fog, hand out ashtrays, and accept that you will smell like a nightclub by landing. Smoking is simply what people do in this era, everywhere and without a second thought, and an airplane cabin is no exception. Passengers light up the moment the mood strikes, puffing away through the meal, the drinks, the long droning hours of the flight. Cigarettes are as natural a part of travel as the luggage. Nobody questions it, nobody objects, and certainly nobody expects the sealed tube full of strangers to be anything other than thoroughly, permanently smoky. It's the background condition of the whole experience. and so the air inside your workplace slowly transforms into something you can practically see. A haze builds up over the hours, a bluish fog hanging in the cabin, thickening with every fresh cigarette. This is a closed space, remember, with the same air circulating through it, so the smoke has nowhere to go but into everything, including you. By mid-flight, you're working inside a gently glowing cloud, moving through the murk with your tray and your smile as though the atmosphere were perfectly clear. Your uniform drinks it all in, every wisp and curl of it, until you carry the flight home in the very fabric of your clothes. That crisp, elegant outfit you assembled so carefully this morning is, by landing, thoroughly perfumed with stale smoke. Your hair holds it. Your skin holds it. You step off the aircraft smelling like the inside of a busy tavern, no matter how fresh you started. It's a strange indignity, spending hours building a picture of pristine glamour, only to end the day reeking like an ashtray that learned to walk. Your lungs, meanwhile, are enduring something they never signed up for, breathing this thick air hour after hour, flight after flight, day after day. You didn't necessarily choose to smoke, yet here you are, marinating in everyone else's habit for your entire working life. There's no clean corner to retreat to, no window to crack, no fresh air section tucked away for the crew. The smoke is simply the environment, and you're required to work in it, cheerfully, as though the fog weren't quietly settling into your chest. And there's nothing to be done about it, which is perhaps the most maddening part. You can hardly ask an entire generation of paying passengers to kindly extinguish their cigarettes, because in this era that request would be baffling, even rude. The smoking is their right and their pleasure, and your discomfort simply doesn't enter the equation. So instead of protesting, you participate in the ritual from the other side, distributing ashtrays, emptying them, keeping the whole smoky operation tidy and pleasant. You are, in effect, the fog's attentive housekeeper, so you work through the blue haze without complaint, because complaint is not part of the image and never will be. You hand out the ashtrays, you breathe the unbreathable, you accept the smell as the cost of the job. It's one more invisible toll the passengers never notice and never imagine, the quiet damage of a cabin full of smoke. And as if the thick air weren't enough, the sky itself is about to add its own contribution to the misery, because these low, slow planes are riding straight into weather that has a very reliable effect on the human stomach. Because these planes fly low and slow through weather, instead of soaring calmly above it, turbulence is a constant companion, and turbulence has a very predictable effect on passengers. Air sickness is common, which means the humble paper bag is one of your most used pieces of equipment. You hand them out, you collect them, you comfort the green-faced, and you somehow keep serving everyone else while the cabin rolls like a small boat. It is not glamorous. No perfume had ever showed this part. You handle it anyway, gracefully, professionally, heroically. The turbulence, as established, is simply part of the deal on these aircraft, which ride through the sky's moods rather than gliding above them. The cabin bounces, sways, and drops through the rough air, and while you've learned to work through it, the passengers have not. To them, every lurch is alarming, and every prolonged stretch of chop is a slow ordeal, and a great many of them respond to all this motion in the most natural and least pleasant way the human body knows. They get sick. Air sickness in this era of low, bumpy flying is common enough to be routine. The rolling of the cabin unsettles stomach after stomach, and so one of your most essential tools becomes the humble paper bag, distributed and collected with a frequency the posters would never dare depict. You keep them handy, you hand them out at the first green flush of a passenger's face, and you deal with the aftermath calmly. It is, without question, the least dignified part of a job sold entirely on dignity. Comforting the afflicted is its own quiet art. A miserable, queasy passenger needs reassurance as much as they need the bag. A steady presence, a kind word, a cool cloth, the calm sense that someone competent is looking after them. So you soothe the green-faced, murmuring that it will pass, that they're doing fine, that landing isn't far. You tend to them the way a nurse tends to the ill, gently and without judgment, even as the very same motion sickening them is doing its best to unsteady you. The truly remarkable part is that you manage all of this while continuing to serve everyone else. The cabin doesn't pause because a few passengers are unwell. There are still meals to clear, drinks to refill, requests to answer, an entire plane of people expecting attention. So you move between tending the sick and serving the well, switching roles in an instant, all on a floor that keeps pitching beneath you like the deck of a small boat in rough seas. It's a juggling act performed on a trampoline, and you never let a single ball drop. None of it is remotely glamorous, and that's rather the point. No advertisement ever showed the stewardess crouched beside a miserable passenger with a paper bag, or making her steady way down a rolling aisle carrying away the evidence of someone's rough flight. The public image is all serene smiles and elegant service. The reality includes this: the unpretty, unspoken labour of caring for people at their most wretched, in conditions that would test anyone's own composure and stomach. Yet, you handle it. And you handle it with a grace that turns something genuinely grim into something almost invisible. That's the heroism hidden in this job, the quiet professionalism that manages the messy human realities without ever letting them puncture the calm. You keep the cabin cared for, the sick comforted, the rest served, and your own expression untroubled through all of it. And speaking of what this work asks of your body, it's time to reckon honestly with the toll of all that standing, walking, lifting and balancing, because by now your own body's beginning to protest quite loudly. Let's talk about your body, which by now is staging a quiet rebellion. You've been standing for hours in heels, the airline insists upon, walking a narrow aisle 1,000 times, lifting heavy trays, bending, twisting, and balancing without ever letting the strain show on your face. Your arches ache, your back complains, your hands are tired. This is genuine physical labour dressed up as effortless charm. By the end of a shift, your feet feel like they've hiked a mountain, and tomorrow you get to do the whole climb again. Start with the standing, because that alone is punishment enough. You're on your feet for the vast bulk of these long flights, rarely with a chance to sit and rest, and you're doing it in heels the airline demands you wear no matter what. Heels are built for looking lovely across a room, not for labouring through a 14-hour shift, and your feet know the difference within the first hour. By the end, they are a chorus of complaint, and there is no swapping them for anything kinder, because the fantasy requires the heel, and the heel requires your suffering. Then there's the walking, endless and repetitive, up and down that narrow aisle more times than anyone could count. Every meal, every drink, every request sends you pacing the length of the cabin again, back and forth, mile after slow mile logged in a space barely wider than your shoulders. It adds up to a genuine trek over the course of a shift, a mountain's worth of steps taken in the worst possible shoes. Your legs carry you through all of it, but they do not do so silently. The lifting is where the real labour announces itself, because those trays are heavy, and as established there are no carts to spare your back. You haul the loaded weight by hand, over and over, from galley to cabin and back. You bend to reach the low seats, twist to serve across a row, crouch, stretch, and heft, all while the aircraft sways beneath you. It's the work of a mover or a labourer, dressed up in white gloves and a pillbox hat. Your back and arms bear a burden the elegant image would never admit exists, and through every ache of it, the cardinal rule holds: The strain must never show. Your feet may be screaming, your back may be knotted, your hands may be trembling with fatigue, and yet your face remains serene, your manner light, your smile intact. This is perhaps the hardest labour of all, the emotional discipline of hiding genuine physical suffering behind a mask of effortless charm. You're not permitted to look tired. You're barely permitted to be tired. You simply carry on gracefully as though none of it cost you a thing. That's the great deception at the heart of this job, plainly stated. It is genuine, grinding physical work, the equal of many a job that no one would ever call glamorous, and it is packaged and sold as delicate feminine grace. The public sees a beautiful woman gliding through the cabin and imagines a life of ease and adventure. They do not see the aching arches, the protesting spine, the tired hands, the sheer athletic endurance the whole performance demands. The charm is real, but so is the labour beneath it, and the labour is the part that stays hidden. By the end of a shift, your body has taken a genuine beating, and your feet in particular feel as though they've climbed a mountain in dress shoes, because in a sense they have. You peel off the heels and your whole self exhales, and then, cruelly, tomorrow arrives with the same climb waiting, the same aisle, the same trays, the same beautiful, punishing shoes. It's relentless in a way the posters never hint at, and as if your own aching body weren't enough to manage, there's a particular kind of passenger who makes the whole ordeal harder still, and he's usually sitting right where you can't avoid him. Ah, and here he is, the passenger who mistakes friendliness for an invitation. In an era that sells you as part of the scenery, some men feel entitled to comment on your looks, grab at your arm, or ask questions no stranger should ask. And you're expected to deflect it all with a laugh and a smile because complaining isn't ladylike and the customer is always right, even when he is very, very wrong. You become an expert at the graceful sidestep, the firm but charming redirect, the smile that hides gritted teeth. The root of the problem lies in how the whole job is packaged, because you have been marketed as part of the glamour, part of the experience, practically part of the decor. The airline sells your youth and your charm as features of the flight, and some passengers absorb that message a little too literally. They see not a working professional, but an amenity, a pretty accessory to their journey who exists for their enjoyment. And a man who sees you that way is a man who feels entitled to behave accordingly. So it begins with the comments, remarks about your looks delivered as though you'd asked for a review, familiar and presumptuous in a way no stranger has any right to be. Then, for some, it escalates. A hand reaches out to catch your arm as you pass. A question is asked that no polite stranger would dream of asking. You are, in these moments, being treated as though your presence in the cabin were an open invitation, as though the uniform came with permission attached. It did not. But try telling him that. Because here is the maddening constraint you work within. You're expected to absorb all of it with grace. Complaining isn't considered ladylike, and the entire ethos of the job insists the customer is always right, even when the customer is behaving very wrong indeed. You cannot snap at him. You cannot embarrass him. You certainly cannot tell him plainly to keep his hands and his comments to himself. Instead, you must manage him, gently, cheerfully, without ever letting the interaction curdle into anything the airline might call a scene. And so, you develop a whole quiet arsenal of techniques, the hard-won skills of a woman who deals with this daily, the graceful sidestep that keeps you just out of reach, the firm but charming redirect that changes the subject without wounding his pride, the bright deflecting laugh that treats an overstep as a harmless joke so you can move past it, the smile that stays fixed in place while your teeth grit quietly behind it. You become an expert at diffusing, deflecting, and escaping, all while appearing to enjoy the exchange. It's a strange and exhausting kind of labour, this constant low-grade management of other people's entitlement, and it goes entirely unrecognised. Nobody trained you for it in charm school, not really, and nobody thanks you for it. Yet it runs beneath the whole job like a current. The steady work of protecting your own dignity without ever being allowed to defend it openly. You handle 100 small violations a week with a smile, because the smile is armour and the smile is required. It's like being asked to win an argument you're forbidden from admitting you're having. The truly unfair part is that the very qualities the job demands of you, the warmth, the friendliness, the endless welcoming charm, are the same qualities the handsy passenger chooses to misread. You're being punished, in a sense, for doing your job well, and you can't stop doing it well, so you simply carry the extra burden of managing the fallout, gracefully and invisibly, as always. It's one more thing the fantasy conveniently leaves out, and as if fending off the difficult passengers weren't enough, you're also expected to care for them when their bodies fail, because tucked into your list of duties is a role that turns you, without warning, into the closest thing to a doctor for miles in any direction. Surprise, you're also the medical staff. Stewardesses are trained in first aid and expected to handle whatever the human body decides to do mid-flight, from fainting to panic to the occasional genuine emergency. Someone feels faint, someone's ears are screaming, someone's had one cocktail too many and needs monitoring. You keep a calm voice and steady hands while quietly running through everything you learned in training. There's no hospital at 4,000 feet. For the length of this flight, the closest thing to a doctor is you and your little kit. It's easy to forget amid the meals and cocktails and constant smiling that you carry real medical responsibility, but you do. Your training included first aid, genuine instruction in how to handle a body in distress, because someone has to be prepared when a passenger takes ill in the sky. The airline knew, even as it sold the glamour, that a cabin full of people is a cabin that will eventually produce a medical situation. And when it does, you are the one expected to step forward. The nurse's cap is hidden inside the pillbox hat all along. The range of what you might face is wide, from the mild to the frightening. A passenger goes pale and lightheaded and needs tending before they slump. Another is in genuine agony as the pressure changes torment their ears. A third has enjoyed one cocktail too many and now requires quiet monitoring to make sure a bad decision doesn't become a real problem. Every flight carries the possibility of some small crisis of the flesh, and you never quite know which one this trip will hand you. And then there are the rarer moments, the ones that make the stakes suddenly real, when a passenger's condition is no longer a discomfort but an emergency. A person in true distress, a body doing something genuinely dangerous, and no help within reach but you. These are the moments your training was truly for, the frightening ones nobody likes to imagine while boarding. They don't happen often, but they happen, and when they do, the pleasant hostess must instantly become the calm first responder. Through all of it, calm is your most important instrument, more vital even than anything in your kit. A frightened passenger or a frightened cabin watching one needs above all to see steadiness, and so you provide it. Your voice stays level, your hand stays sure, your manner stays unhurried, even as your mind races through everything you learned in training, sorting for the right response. The composure is partly performance and partly the very thing that keeps the situation from spiraling. Panic spreads, calm contains. You are the source of the calm. What makes it all so weighty is the sheer isolation of the setting, the plain fact that there is no hospital at 4,000 feet. On the ground, help is a phone call away. Up here, help is you. For the entire length of the flight, You and your modest little medical kit are the closest thing to a doctor that anyone aboard is going to get. That's an extraordinary responsibility to rest on the shoulders of someone the public imagines is mainly there to pour coffee and look lovely. So you carry that responsibility quietly, alongside all the others, ready at any moment to set down the tray and tend to a body in trouble. It's yet another role folded invisibly into the job, the emergency caregiver hiding behind the serene smile. The passengers rarely think about it, and that's fine, because your competence is the kind that's meant to go unnoticed until the instant it's desperately needed. And of the many people who need looking after in your care, some need it not for their bodies at all, but for their nerves, because flying is still a strange and frightening marvel to a great many of the souls in your cabin. Flying is still new and frightening to many people, so a good part of your job is emotional support with wings. You hold the hand of the white-knuckled first-timer, reassure the woman convinced every bump is the end, and entertain the small child who has decided the aisle is a racetrack and your leg is the finish line. You soothe, you distract, you charm, you referee. You're a therapist, a babysitter, and a bouncer, all while balancing a coffee pot and never once losing that serene, everything is fine expression. You have to remember that in this era, air travel is still a marvel, and marvels are frightening. Plenty of your passengers have never left the ground before in their lives, and now here they are, sealed in a rattling metal tube miles above the earth, listening to the engines roar and feeling the floor sway. For them this is not routine. It is an act of enormous faith, and their nerves show it. So a real part of your job, unwritten in any manual, is calming the very human terror of doing something the human body was never built to do. The white-knuckled first-timer is a familiar sight, gripping the armrests as though sheer force might keep the plane aloft. You go to them, you offer a steady word, sometimes quite literally a steadying hand, and you talk them down from their fear with the practiced warmth of someone who has done it 100 times. Then there's the woman convinced that every bump of turbulence is the beginning of the end, flinching at each lurch of the low, weather-riding aircraft. You reassure her again and again that the shaking is normal, that all is well, that she is safe. Her fear is real, so your patience must be endless. And then, at the opposite end of the trouble, there are the children. The small passenger who has decided that the narrow aisle is a racetrack and your leg is the finish line, who cannot sit still, who treats the cabin as a playground built expressly for their delight. You entertain them, distract them, gently corral them, keeping them amused enough to stay out of harm's way and quiet enough to spare the surrounding passengers. It's a bit like refereeing a very small, very determined force of nature, all while pretending it's the most charming thing in the world. The sheer range of roles you play in a single flight is dizzying. You're a therapist to the anxious, coaxing, frightened adults through their fear with soft words and calm presence. You're a babysitter to the restless children, keeping them occupied and safe. You are, when needed, a bouncer of sorts, managing the ones who won't settle and keeping order in a confined space. And you shift between all of these on a moment's notice, reading each passenger and giving them exactly the kind of attention their particular trouble requires. The truly impressive part is that you do all of this while also doing everything else, because the emotional labour never replaces the physical labour. It simply piles on top of it. You're soothing the nervous flyer with one hand and balancing the coffee pot with the other, comforting a crying child while remembering who still needs their meal cleared. There is no pausing the service to tend to feelings. You manage the hearts and the hands at the same time, and you make it look effortless. It's like being asked to run a dinner service and a counselling session and a daycare all at once in a moving vehicle. And beneath every bit of it, the serene expression never wavers, because that calm face is itself the medicine. A frightened cabin takes its cue from you, and if you look untroubled, the passengers begin to believe that everything truly is fine. Your composure is contagious in the best way, spreading reassurance to everyone who catches it. You give and give of your patience and warmth, quietly, for the length of the flight. And after all that emotional generosity, after all that skilled and demanding work, you might imagine you're handsomely rewarded for it, which brings us to the paycheck, a subject best approached sitting down. Now let's peek at the money, and try not to laugh or cry. For all the beauty, the training, the standards, and the physical toll, the pay is surprisingly thin. You're selling glamour, but you're not exactly living it. The airline gets a walking advertisement and a hard worker for a fairly modest wage, and the prestige is supposed to make up the difference. Prestige, sadly, does not pay your rent or fix your aching feet. But you smile, because complaining about pay is also apparently not part of the image. Consider everything the job has demanded of you up to this point. You survived a brutal application, endured weeks of training, submitted to the scale and the girdle and the endless grooming rules, hauled heavy trays through turbulence, soothed the frightened, tended the sick, and fended off the handsy, all while never letting your smile slip. That is an extraordinary amount of skilled, demanding work. You would expect it to be rewarded accordingly. And then you see the wage, and the number does not remotely match the effort. The pay is modest, thinner than the glamorous image would ever lead anyone to believe. You are the glossy symbol of high living, the face of luxury travel, and yet your own life is nothing so lavish. There's a strange irony in it, spending your days selling a fantasy of the good life to well-heeled passengers, while your own paycheck keeps you firmly grounded in the ordinary. You pour the cocktails and carve the roasts of a world you can't quite afford to inhabit yourself. The glamour is genuine. It just doesn't belong to you. From the airline's perspective, of course, the arrangement is a marvel of efficiency. In hiring you, they get a walking, smiling advertisement and a hard-working employee bundled into a single, modestly paid package. You are marketing and labour at once, the beautiful face on the poster and the tireless worker in the aisle, and they pay you as though you are merely one small thing rather than the many demanding things you actually are. It's a tremendous bargain for them. For you, considerably less so. The justification offered, spoken and unspoken, is prestige. The job is glamorous, isn't it? It's admired, envied, held up as a dream career for young women across the country. Surely that prestige counts for something. Surely the honour of the role helps make up for the slimness of the wage, and there's a kind of quiet manipulation in that logic. The idea that you should be grateful enough for the glamour that you won't mind being underpaid for the labour. You're meant to accept the shine as partial payment, but prestige, as anyone who has tried to spend it quickly discovers, is not currency. It does not cover the rent. It does not restock the cupboard, and it most certainly does not soothe the aching feet you drag home after 14 hours in those mandated heels. The admiration of strangers is pleasant, but it settles no bills and eases no pains. When the shift is over and the glamour is hung up with the uniform, you're left with a tired body and a thin envelope, and the prestige is nowhere to be found on the accounting, so you do the only thing the job permits, which is to smile and say nothing, because complaining about pay, like complaining about everything else, is simply not part of the image. The glamorous stewardess is not supposed to grumble about her wages any more than she's supposed to wince about her feet. You keep the disappointment tucked away with all the other invisible costs, and you carry on selling the fantasy at a discount. And speaking of the many ways this job quietly owns you, the modest pay is only the start, because the airline's reach extends well past your working hours and right into how you're allowed to live. You might imagine an independent, jet-setting woman answering to no one. Reality is closer to a very strict boarding school. Especially early on, your living arrangements, your behaviour and your appearance can all fall under company scrutiny, with curfews, roommates and supervisors keeping a watchful eye. There are standards to uphold even off the clock because you represent the airline every waking moment. Your life isn't fully your own. You're always, in some quiet way, on duty, being observed, being measured against the fantasy you were hired to embody. The public picture is one of glorious independence. The modern young woman with wings, free and worldly and beholden to nobody. It's a lovely image, and it is largely a fiction. The truth is that a great deal of your life falls under the company's watchful management, particularly in the early years, and the arrangement bears a striking resemblance to a strict boarding school. There are rules, watchers, and expectations that reach far past the moment you clock out, and you're expected to honour every one of them. Your living arrangements themselves can be a matter of company concern. You may be housed with other stewardesses, sharing quarters under conditions the airline has a say in, with the sort of oversight one might expect at a dormitory, rather than for grown, employed women. Roommates are assigned, spaces are kept to a standard, and the whole domestic side of your life carries the faint but constant awareness that it is not entirely private. Where and how you live is to some degree the airline's business too. There can be curfews, actual restrictions on your comings and goings, as though you were a schoolgirl rather than a professional doing a demanding job. Your behaviour off the clock is scrutinised, because a stewardess who conducts herself poorly in her own time reflects on the company all the same. And your appearance remains under review even when you're not working, since you are, in the airline's eyes, a walking representative of the brand at every hour of the day. The image doesn't get to rest just because you've taken off the uniform. That's the heart of it, really. You represent the airline every waking moment, and so the standards follow you everywhere, into your home, your free time, your private conduct. There is no clean line between the working you and the off-duty you, because as far as the company is concerned, there is only the one you, and she is always, in some sense, on display. You carry the fantasy with you wherever you go, and you're expected to protect it around the clock. The effect of all this is that your life never fully feels like your own. You're perpetually, quietly on duty, aware of being observed, conscious of being measured against the ideal you were hired to embody. Even in your rest, even in your leisure, some part of you is minding the standards, keeping the image intact. It's an exhausting way to exist. This sense that you can never quite step out of the role, that the poised, proper stewardess must live on even when the workday is done. The job doesn't just take your hours, it takes your whole way of being. And so the glamorous independence turns out to be its opposite. A life more supervised and constrained than most, dressed up in the costume of freedom. You're watched, housed, curfewed and scrutinized, all in service of a fantasy that insists you're utterly free. The irony would be funny if it weren't so tiring. Still, for all the oversight, there is one part of this arrangement that does deliver a genuine taste of the wider world, even if it's a lonelier taste than the posters promise, because the job does carry you night after night into unfamiliar cities far from anyone you love. On the bright side, you do see the country, one anonymous hotel room at a time. Layovers drop you into cities far from home, with a handful of hours to rest, explore, or simply lie down and stare at the ceiling. There's a lonely romance to it, unpacking a small bag in yet another unfamiliar room, eating dinner alone, then waking to that front desk phone call all over again. It sounds adventurous, and sometimes it is. Other times it's just tired feet in a new zip code. There is a genuine upside here, and it deserves its due, because the job really does carry you across the country, in a way few young women of the era get to experience. Layovers set you down in city after city, places you might never otherwise have seen, and for a handful of hours each is yours to sample. You collect towns the way others collect postcards, a night here, a night there, a growing map of somewheres you've briefly been. For all its costs, the job does widen your world. But those handful of hours are just that, a handful, and how you spend them depends entirely on what the shift has left of you. Sometimes you use them to explore, to walk an unfamiliar street, to glimpse a new place before it's time to move on. More often, after a long day on your feet, you use them simply to rest, to lie down in yet another unfamiliar room and let your aching body recover for the next flight. The adventure is real but rationed, always squeezed into the narrow gap between one departure and the next. And the setting for all this travel is the anonymous hotel room, endlessly repeated, each one nearly identical to the last. You unpack your small bag in a space that isn't yours, in a city where you know no one, and the sameness of these rooms begins to blur them together. The bedspread, the curtains, the little desk, the phone on the nightstand that will ring you awake in the morning. You live out of that small bag, always half-packed, always ready to leave, never quite settled anywhere. Home becomes a memory you visit between trips. There's a particular loneliness woven through it, a quiet ache the glamour never mentions. You eat dinner alone in strange cities, a solitary figure at a table for one, far from family, far from anyone who knows your name. The freedom of travel comes bundled with the isolation of the traveller, the sense of being perpetually a stranger passing through. It's a romantic loneliness in its way, the wistful solitude of the woman always on the move. But it is loneliness all the same, and no amount of new scenery quite fills the space it leaves. Then comes the morning, and with it that front desk phone call all over again, the ringing summons that starts the whole cycle anew. You wake in the unfamiliar room, remember where you are, assemble yourself once more into the flawless woman the day requires, and set off to do it all again. The rhythm is relentless, city to city, room to room, call to call, an endless loop of arrival and departure, with barely a pause to catch your breath. The novelty of each new place is real, but so is the exhaustion of never staying anywhere long enough to belong. So the adventure and the ache travel together, inseparable, and which one you feel on any given night depends largely on how tired your feet are. Some evenings the strange city sparkles with possibility, and you feel lucky to be seeing it at all. Other evenings it's just a new zip code to be exhausted in, one more anonymous room between one more pair of flights. That's the honest shape of the glamorous travelling life, wonder and weariness in equal measure. And of the many things the job asks you to navigate carefully in all these far-flung places, few are trickier than matters of the heart, because romance, for a stewardess, comes wrapped in a rulebook all its own. Given that the whole job markets you as the ideal single woman, it's no shock that romance comes with a rulebook. Dating certain co-workers may be frowned upon or forbidden, and the ever-present marriage ban means any serious relationship becomes a secret to protect. Passengers propose, pilots flirt, and the world assumes you're perpetually available for courtship. You navigate it all carefully, because one wrong step, one whispered engagement, and the career you worked so hard for could vanish faster than the drink cart at happy hour. Everything about the job's marketing conspires to make you an object of romantic interest, whether you want to be or not. You're sold to the public as the ideal young woman, single and charming and endlessly available, the very picture of the eligible modern girl. So of course romance swirls around you constantly, an occupational hazard as reliable as turbulence. The trouble is that you're expected to be perpetually courtable and never actually caught, to embody availability while carefully avoiding the one thing that availability implies. It's a needle you're forever threading. The complications begin close to home, with your own colleagues. Dating certain co-workers may be discouraged or outright forbidden, which is awkward given that these are the people you spend your working life beside. The crew becomes a minefield of maybe-nots. relationships that might bloom naturally but must be suppressed on account of company preference. So you keep a careful distance where the rules demand it, denying yourself the ordinary human tendency to grow close to the people you work alongside. Even the natural pull toward a co-worker becomes something to police in yourself. And overshadowing all of it is that marriage ban from earlier, the great looming threat that turns any serious romance into contraband. Fall genuinely in love, and you're falling toward the end of your job, so any real relationship must become a secret carefully guarded. You conduct your love life in whispers and shadows, protecting it from the company's notice the way one might protect a fragile, forbidden thing. The deeper the feeling grows, the greater the danger, which is a cruel bargain to strike with your own heart. Happiness itself becomes a liability to be concealed. Meanwhile, the outside world presses in with its own assumptions, treating you as though you exist expressly to be wooed. Passengers propose, sometimes in earnest, dazzled by the fantasy the airline has sold them. Pilots flirt, familiar with the routine and confident in their charm. Everyone, it seems, assumes you're available and eager to be courted, that romance is simply part of what you're for. You field it all with practiced grace, neither encouraging the fantasy nor puncturing it, forever managing other people's expectations of your heart. The stakes, of course, are what make the whole delicate dance so fraught, because a single misstep can cost you everything. One relationship discovered, one whispered engagement overheard, one wedding ring glimpsed on the wrong finger, and the career you work so hard to build could evaporate in an instant. So you navigate romance the way you navigate turbulence, carefully, constantly alert, always aware of how quickly things could go wrong. The joy other people take for granted in courtship is, for you, shadowed by risk at every turn. It's a strange existence, being marketed as the perfect romantic prospect, while being forbidden the ordinary romantic outcomes that everyone else pursues freely. You are the eternal object of desire who must never actually be won, at least not openly, not without sacrificing the very role that makes you desirable in the first place. The fantasy demands your availability and punishes your love, and that word, fantasy, sits at the center of everything, because ultimately your entire job is the tending of an illusion, a beautiful, carefully maintained image that the whole industry depends on you to keep intact. Behind all of this is a machine dedicated to making your job look magical. The airlines lean hard into the image of the beautiful, poised, endlessly cheerful stewardess, splashing her across posters and ads as the very symbol of modern travel. You are the glossy face of the whole industry. What the public never sees is the girdle, the scale, the smoke, the aching arches, and the man in seat 6. You keep the fantasy intact by hiding the labour, which is, when you think about it, the hardest labour of all. There is an entire apparatus of marketing built around making your work appear effortless and enchanting, and it is remarkably good at its job. The airlines lean into the image with everything they have, presenting the stewardess as the beautiful, serene, ceaselessly cheerful embodiment of the jet age. She graces the posters and the advertisements, smiling out at the public as the very symbol of modern travel, the glossy promise of what flying can be. That radiant figure isn't an accident. She's a carefully constructed product, and you are the one wearing her every day. So you become the face of the whole industry, the shining representative of everything air travel is supposed to mean. When people picture flying, they picture you, poised and lovely, gliding through a sunlit cabin with a graceful smile. You carry the entire romance of the era on your shoulders, the sense that to fly is to enter a world of elegance and ease. It's a considerable thing to represent this collective fantasy of modern glamour, and the industry rests a great deal of its appeal on your ability to embody it convincingly. But of course, You know what stands behind that glossy image, because you've lived every hidden hour of it. The public never sees the girdle cinched tight beneath the uniform, quietly torturing your midsection through the long shift. They never see the scale you fear, the ritual weigh-ins, the constant management of your own body. They don't smell the smoke soaked into your clothes, don't feel the arches aching in your mandated heels, don't witness the man in seat 6 and all his handsy, entitled kin. Every unglamorous truth of the job stays carefully out of frame, and keeping all of that out of frame is precisely the work, the deepest and most demanding labour of the entire profession. You maintain the fantasy by hiding the reality, by ensuring that not one crack of the genuine difficulty shows through the polished surface. The passenger must see only the effortless grace, never the effort that produces it. So you smile through the discomfort, glide through the exhaustion, charm through the aggravation, and let no one glimpse what any of it costs you. The illusion depends entirely on your willingness to conceal its price. When you truly consider it, that concealment is the hardest labour of all, harder than the trays and the turbulence and the aching feet combined. Physical work is difficult, but this is something more, the relentless emotional discipline of making struggle invisible, of performing ease while enduring hardship, hour after hour, day after day. You're not merely doing a demanding job, you're simultaneously hiding just how demanding it is, and that hiding takes a toll all its own, a quiet, constant effort that no one sees and no one credits. The mask is heavier than anything on the tray, so you keep the fantasy pristine, this beautiful lie that flying is pure magic, and the woman serving it feels no strain at all. It's a gift you give the passengers, really, this seamless illusion of effortless grace, and it's a gift they never know they've received. The whole glittering image of the jet age rests on your hidden labour, on the girdle and the scale and the swallowed complaints kept forever behind the smile. And even as you tend that gleaming fantasy, the sky itself refuses to play along, because the real conditions of the work, the long hours and the rough weather, are always there beneath the glamour, waiting to test you all over again. These early flights are long, and the technology to dodge bad weather is limited, so your day can stretch and twist with every storm the sky throws up. Flights get bumpy, get delayed, get rerouted, and you ride out all of it while keeping the cabin calm and fed. There's no smooth cruise above the clouds waiting to rescue you. You're down in the thick of the weather, hour after hour, smiling through the shudders and topping off coffee, like the floor isn't currently pretending to be a trampoline. The length of these flights is the first hard fact of the work, because the low, slow aircraft of the era turn every journey into an endurance test. What the future will accomplish in a swift, smooth hop takes hours upon hours here, and every one of those hours is one you spend on your feet, serving, soothing, and smiling. A long haul in this age is genuinely long, a marathon of a shift with no shortcut to the end. You settle into the duration the way you settle into everything else, with quiet stamina and a fixed, pleasant expression. Compounding the length is the limited ability to avoid bad weather, because the technology to route cleanly around storms simply isn't there yet. Where a modern jet might climb above trouble or steer neatly clear of it, your aircraft has fewer options and less warning. So the weather comes as it comes, and you ride out whatever the sky decides to throw at you. Your day bends and stretches around the storms, at the mercy of conditions no one can yet fully predict or dodge. The sky sets the terms, and you simply meet them. That means your working day is a shape-shifting thing, twisting with every atmospheric mood. Flights turn bumpy as you plough through rough air. Flights get delayed as weather fouls the schedule. Flights get rerouted, sending you the long way around some churning system, adding hours you hadn't planned for. Through all of these disruptions, your job remains exactly the same. Keep the cabin calm, keep the passengers fed, keep the whole operation running smoothly no matter how the weather is misbehaving outside the windows. The chaos is external. Your composure is not permitted to be, and crucially, there's no smooth cruise above the clouds waiting to rescue you, no serene stretch of calm to look forward to as a reward for weathering the rough patch. On these planes, you're down in the thick of it, flying through the weather rather than over it, which means the shuddering can be near constant on a bad day. You don't get the reprieve of glassy air at altitude. You get the rutted low road, hour after hour, and you learn to simply live inside the motion, working through it as though it were perfectly ordinary. So you top off the coffee while the floor bucks beneath you like a trampoline, and you do it without spilling and without any sign of strain. You serve the meals through the shudders, steady the trays through the drops, keep the cabin comfortable while the aircraft rattles its way through the storm. It's an extraordinary feat of balance and nerve, this ability to perform delicate service in genuinely rough conditions, and you make it look like nothing at all. The passengers see a calm woman pouring coffee. They rarely register that she's doing it in the middle of a fight with the sky. That's the honest reality beneath the glamorous image, the long weather-tossed halls that the posters would never dare depict. The job is not a gentle glide through sunny skies. It is hours of hard, steady work performed in conditions that would rattle anyone, all delivered with a smile that never lets the difficulty show. You endure the length and the turbulence with the same quiet toughness you bring to everything else. And the storms don't only shake the cabin and stretch the schedule. They work on your body too, in ways as relentless as they are invisible, because the very act of flying, up and down through the changing air, takes its own quiet toll on you. The human body was not designed for repeated changes in cabin pressure, and yours gets to experience them again and again and again. Ears pop and ache, sinuses throb, and the constant altitude shifts leave you a little wrung out even on a good day. Passengers suffer too, clutching their heads on descent, and of course you're the one handing out gum and reassurance. You learn to work through the pressure headaches the way you work through everything else on this job. Quietly, gracefully, and without ever letting it show. Flying, for all its wonder, does peculiar things to the body, and the changes in cabin pressure are chief among them. The human frame simply wasn't built to ascend and descend through the sky over and over, and yet that is precisely what yours does, day after day, flight after flight. Every climb and every descent works on your ears, your sinuses, your whole head, in ways that accumulate over a career of repeated altitude shifts. What a passenger endures once, you endure endlessly, until the body's protests become a familiar part of the job. The ears are the first to complain, popping and aching as the pressure changes squeeze and release them. Then the sinuses join in, throbbing with the shifts, adding their own dull misery to the mix. And on top of it all comes a general wrung-out feeling, a low-grade weariness that clings even on a good day, the quiet cost of a body constantly adjusting to the changing air. It's the kind of discomfort that never quite rises to a crisis but never quite goes away either, a steady background ache you learn to carry. The passengers feel it too, of course, and often more acutely, since they haven't built up your hard-won tolerance. On descent especially, you see them clutching their heads, wincing at the pressure building behind their faces, some in real distress as their ears refuse to cooperate. And naturally you're the one who tends to them, moving through the cabin handing out gum to help them equalize, offering reassurance, easing their discomfort as best you can. Their suffering becomes one more thing for you to manage, even as your own head is throbbing along with theirs. So you become an expert at working through the pressure headaches, the same way you've become an expert at working through everything else this job throws at you. The ache settles in behind your eyes, and you keep serving. The sinuses throb, and you keep smiling. You've learned that the discomfort is simply part of the territory, an occupational condition to be endured rather than escaped, and so you endure it, folding it into the long list of small sufferings you carry invisibly through each shift. It's just another thing to push past, gracefully, without complaint. And that's the essential trick of it, as always the discipline of never letting it show. Your head may be pounding, your ears may be aching, your whole self may feel wrung out from the endless altitude shifts, and yet your face reveals none of it. You tend to the passenger's pain while quietly bearing your own, keeping the serene expression fixed in place through the throbbing. The composure holds no matter what the pressure is doing to your skull. You are, as ever, the calm surface over the hidden struggle, giving no hint of the toll. It's one more invisible cost tucked into a job full of them, this steady wearing down of the body by the very act of flight. The passengers never think about what repeated ascents and descents do to the woman who does them for a living. They only see the gum arriving kindly in their moment of need, the reassuring smile, the calm presence easing their discomfort. Your own aching head stays your secret, as so much does. And there's one more hard truth about this era that deserves an honest reckoning, one that has nothing to do with pressure or turbulence, and everything to do with who was permitted through the door in the first place. It's worth pausing on a harder truth about this era. The glamorous stewardess of the 1950s was, by deliberate policy, almost always young, white, and fitting a narrow mould, and women of colour were effectively shut out of these jobs for most of the decade. The doors only began to open in the later 1950s through the determination of women who refused to accept that the sky had a colour line. It's a real part of this history, and it deserves to be remembered plainly without a punchline. The glamorous image we've been describing throughout, the poised young woman in the tailored uniform, was not open to everyone, and that exclusion was no accident. It was policy, deliberate and enforced. The stewardess of this era was expected to fit a very narrow mould, and that mould was almost always young and white, shaped by the prejudices of the time as much as by the airline's notions of their ideal image. The fantasy the industry sold was a fantasy with a carefully guarded entrance, and many were turned away at the door before they could even begin. For most of the decade, women of colour were effectively shut out of these jobs, barred not by any lack of ability but by the colour line that ran through so much of American life in these years. The same qualities that would have made them excellent at the work, the poise, the warmth, the competence under pressure, counted for nothing against a policy determined to keep the role narrow and exclusive. It was a closed door, plainly and unjustly closed, and it stayed closed to far too many for far too long. The doors only began to open in the later part of the 1950s, and they did not open on their own. They were pushed open through the determination and courage of women who refused to accept that the sky belonged only to some. These were people who challenged the exclusion directly, who insisted on their right to the same opportunity, who would not accept that a colour line should stretch all the way up into the clouds. Their persistence, in the face of a system built to exclude them, is the reason the door began to give at all. It matters to tell this part plainly, because a history of this era that left it out would be a false and incomplete one. The glamour was real, but so was the exclusion, and both belong in any honest account of what this job and this time truly were. To celebrate the one while ignoring the other would be to repeat, in a small way, the erasure that kept these women out of the picture to begin with. So we say it directly. The glossy image had a barrier built into it, and that barrier caused real harm to real people. And it deserves to be remembered without a punchline, because some parts of history are not the stuff of wry comedy, and this is one of them. The struggle of the women who broke through this barrier is a matter of genuine dignity and courage, and it would be wrong to wrap it in the same light humour we've brought to girdles and cocktails and the man in seat 6. There's a time for the wry observation and a time for the plain, respectful truth, and this is firmly the latter. Some things are simply honoured by being stated clearly and left to stand. So we pause here, on this harder ground, to acknowledge what the glamorous image concealed and the people who fought to change it. Their determination widened the sky for those who came after, and that widening is a real and important part of this story, as real as anything else we've described. It's a reminder that the fantasy had its shadows, and that progress, where it came because someone insisted on it. And with that honest reckoning behind us, we arrive at the last chapter of the stewardess's journey, the moment when, one way or another, the uniform comes off for the final time, and so we come to the end of the runway. One day, whether by marriage, by age, or by the airline simply deciding your time was up, the uniform comes off for good, or, for many women this career lasted only a few short years, a brief bright chapter before they were quietly ushered back toward ordinary life. Some were relieved, some were heartbroken. All of them carried the aching feet, the hard-won poise, and the strange pride of having been, for a little while, the calm, smiling heart of a roaring machine in the sky. The end arrives for every stewardess, and it tends to arrive early, brought on by one of the several forces that have shadowed the whole career. Perhaps it's marriage, that forbidden happiness finally chosen over the job. Perhaps it's age, the ticking clock at last running out as the calendar crosses the airline's arbitrary line. Or perhaps it's simply the company deciding, for reasons of its own, that your time has come. However it happens, the day arrives when the uniform comes off for good and the roaring machine flies on without you. For most women, the whole chapter proves remarkably brief. Just a few short years between the first flight and the last. All that effort, the brutal application, the weeks of training, the endless standards and physical toll, culminates in a career measured not in decades but in a handful of bright, demanding seasons. And then it's over, and you're quietly ushered back toward ordinary life, the wings folded away, the glamour retired, the extraordinary interval closed. It was intense while it lasted, and then, rather suddenly, it simply wasn't your life anymore. The women who lived it walked away with different feelings, as women do. Some were genuinely relieved, glad to lay down the aching feet and the cinched girdle and the endless smiling, ready to trade the exhausting glamour for something gentler and more their own. Others were heartbroken, mourning the loss of a role they had loved and fought for, pushed out before they were ready by rules that had nothing to do with how well they'd done the work. The end meant release for some and grief for others, and often, no doubt, a complicated tangle of both. But whatever they felt about leaving, they all carried the same things away with them, marks the job had pressed permanently into who they were. The aching feet, first of all, the physical legacy of all those hours in mandated heels on unsteady floors, and the hard-won poise, that unshakable grace under pressure they'd been forged into, a composure that would serve them for the rest of their lives long after the uniform was gone. The body remembered the labour, and the spirit remembered the discipline. Both stayed with them, and beneath it all they carried a strange and genuine pride, the quiet knowledge of what they had actually been. Not merely the pretty face on a poster, but the calm, smiling heart of a roaring machine in the sky, the woman who fed and soothed and safeguarded a cabin full of strangers through smoke and turbulence, and the man in seat 6, all while making it look like nothing at all. They'd done something genuinely hard and done it with grace, and no rule that pushed them out could take that knowledge from them. They knew what the fantasy had cost, and they knew they had paid it well. So the uniform comes off, and the woman steps back into ordinary life, carrying her aching feet and her hard-won poise and her private pride into whatever comes next. The glamour fades, the roar of those propellers recedes into memory, and the brief bright chapter closes, but something of it endures in her, the strength she was made to summon, the composure she was made to master, the quiet toughness beneath all that enforced softness. She was, for a little while, the serene centre of an impossible job, and that was no small thing to have been. So there you have it, a single stretch of life as a 1950s stewardess, from the ringing hotel phone before dawn to the day the uniform came off for the very last time. You survived the scale and the girdle, the buttoned jacket in the sweltering cabin, the heels that hated your feet. You carved a roast at 4,000 feet, poured cocktails for a man who wouldn't stop talking, handed out little paper bags through the turbulence, and soothed the trembling first-time flyer, all while breathing air the colour of a nightclub. You were a cook, a waitress, a nurse, a therapist, a babysitter and a bouncer, and you did every bit of it with a smile that was never ever allowed to slip. It was, when you strip away the glossy posters, extraordinarily hard work. And the hardest work of all was hiding just how hard it was, keeping the fantasy pristine while your body quietly fell apart beneath the pretty uniform. So tonight, as you settle into your own soft bed, no front desk call coming, no scale waiting, no supervisor eyeing your left hand for a ring, maybe spare a warm thought for those women. The ones who smiled through the smoke and the aching arches, and the man in seat 6, and the ones who fought their way through a door that had been unfairly closed to them, so the sky could belong to more of us. They were tougher than the glamour ever let on, poised, patient, stubborn, and quietly heroic, holding a coffee pot steady while the whole world shook. Because history is often like that, not as pretty as the advertisement, but far more human and far braver than anyone thought to put on the poster. Rest easy now. Your feet don't hurt. You're already home.